The morning sun cast long shadows across the Naval Special Warfare Training Facility in Coronado, as Sarah Martinez adjusted her running shoes for the third time. She had driven 4 hours from Los Angeles, clutching an invitation that still seemed surreal. The Navy had opened their elite fitness assessment program to civilian athletes as part of a research study, and somehow her marathon times had caught their attention. Standing at 5 feet 4 inches with a runner's lean build, Sarah looked nothing like the imposing figures she expected to encounter. She had been running competitively for 8 years, ever since college. But this was different. This was Navy SEAL territory, where legends were born and ordinary humans discovered their breaking points. The facility buzzed with activity as she approached the main building. Through the windows, she could see muscular men in Navy uniforms preparing equipment and reviewing clipboards. Her stomach twisted with nervous energy. But she reminded herself why she was here. The invitation had mentioned testing civilian fitness levels against military standards, and Sarah had never backed down from a challenge. A petty officer directed her to a waiting area where she found herself alone among metal folding chairs. The walls displayed photographs of SEAL teams in action, underwater demolition training, and grueling obstacle courses that looked designed to break the human spirit. She pulled out her phone and reread the email that had started this journey. 3 months earlier, Sarah had completed the Los Angeles Marathon in 2 hours and 47 minutes, placing 3rd among women and 15th overall. Her time had somehow made its way to a Navy research coordinator studying comparative fitness metrics between elite civilian athletes and military personnel. The invitation had arrived 2 weeks later, formal and intimidating on official Navy letterhead. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway, and Sarah looked up to see a group of men entering the building. They moved with a confidence that seemed carved from stone. Their conversation punctuated by easy laughter and technical jargon she barely understood. These were active-duty SEALs, she realized. The real deal. One of them, a tall man with graying temples and arms like tree trunks, noticed her sitting alone. He approached with a curious expression, his eyes taking in her civilian clothes and running gear. "You lost, miss?" he asked. Not unkindly, but with the assumption that she had wandered into the wrong building. Sarah stood, extending her hand with more confidence than she felt. "I'm Sarah Martinez. I'm here for the Civilian Fitness Assessment Program." The man's eyebrows rose slightly as he shook her hand, his grip firm, but not crushing. "I see. Well, you're definitely in the right place. I'm Commander Walsh, and these are some of my men. We'll be observing today's session." The other SEALs gathered around, their curiosity evident. Sarah could hear whispered comments about the research program, and she caught fragments of their conversation. They were clearly surprised to see a woman, and a relatively small one at that, preparing to attempt their standards. A research coordinator appeared with a clipboard, introducing himself as Dr. Peterson from the Naval Health Research Center. He explained that Sarah would be attempting a modified version of the SEAL physical screening test, designed to evaluate how civilian athletes compared to military personnel in specific fitness categories. The test includes a 500-yard swim, push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, and a 4-mile run, Dr. Peterson explained, his tone clinical and matter-of-fact. "We've had several civilian participants, mostly former college athletes, and current fitness enthusiasts. The goal is to establish baseline comparisons." Commander Walsh crossed his arms, studying Sarah with professional interest. "What's your background, Miss Martinez?" he asked. Sarah explained her marathon experience, her training regimen, and her personal records. The SEALs listened politely, but she could sense their skepticism. In their world, civilian fitness was a different category entirely from military readiness. As they walked toward the testing area, Sarah overheard one of the younger SEALs comment to his teammate, "Wonder how long before she taps out." The remark wasn't malicious, just matter-of-fact, the kind of assumption born from years of watching people discover their limitations against military standards. The testing facility was impressive and intimidating in equal measure. An Olympic-sized pool dominated one area, while another section contained pull-up bars, exercise mats, and timing equipment. Everything was precise, measured, and designed to extract maximum performance while recording every detail. Sarah began her warm-up routine, the familiar movements helping to calm her nerves. She had trained for this moment, adjusting her workouts to include more swimming and upper body strength training. But standing here, surrounded by men who represented the pinnacle of military fitness, she wondered if her preparation had been enough. The SEALs continued their own preparations, their movements efficient and practiced. They joked among themselves, the easy camaraderie of men who had tested themselves together in the most demanding circumstances imaginable. Sarah was an outsider here, a curiosity, someone whose presence added an interesting variable to their routine. Dr. Peterson called everyone together for the final briefing. The test would begin in 20 minutes, he announced. And Sarah would be going through each event with timing and measurement identical to military standards. There would be no modifications, no allowances, no special considerations. Commander Walsh approached Sarah one final time before the test began. "No pressure," he said with a slight smile. "But you should know that our minimum passing standards are pretty demanding. Most civilians find them challenging." His tone was encouraging but realistic, the voice of someone who had seen many people face these tests and fall short. Sarah nodded, appreciating his honesty. She looked around the facility one more time, taking in the faces of the men who would be watching her performance. They weren't hostile, but they clearly expected to witness another civilian learning the difference between regular fitness and military-grade physical demands. The moment of truth was approaching, and Sarah felt the familiar pre-race butterflies that always preceded her biggest challenges. This time, however, the stakes felt different. She wasn't just racing against the clock or other competitors. She was about to test herself against the standards that defined some of the world's most elite warriors. The pool area fell silent as Dr. Peterson explained the first event. 500 yards in the pool, any stroke, with a maximum time limit that would challenge even experienced swimmers. Sarah had spent weeks preparing for this moment, training in her local pool until the lifeguards knew her by name. "Swimming isn't really my strong suit," she admitted to Commander Walsh as they walked to the pool deck. "I'm more of a land-based athlete." Walsh nodded knowingly. Having seen many excellent runners struggle in the water, swimming required different muscle groups and a completely different kind of endurance. The pool stretched out before them, its lanes marked with floating dividers that had seen countless SEAL candidates push themselves to their limits. The water was perfectly clear, almost intimidating in its pristine condition. Sarah could see all the way to the bottom, where black lines marked the swimming lanes. Several SEALs positioned themselves around the pool as unofficial observers, their arms crossed as they waited to see how this civilian athlete would handle military swimming standards. They had done this swim countless times, both in pools and in the open ocean, under far more challenging conditions. Sarah stepped onto the starting block, adjusting her goggles and taking several deep breaths. The familiar pre-race routine helped center her mind, though her heart rate was already elevated from nerves rather than exertion. She had practiced this distance dozens of times, but never with so many eyes watching her every stroke. "Whenever you're ready," called Dr. Peterson, his stopwatch already in hand. The research coordinator had explained that timing would be precise to the 10th of a second, just as it would be for any military candidate taking the official test. Sarah dove in with a clean entry, her body cutting through the water as she began her freestyle stroke. The pool felt different from her home facility, larger, and somehow more serious. Each stroke carried additional weight, knowing that men who had mastered this pool were now watching her attempt to meet their standards. Her form was solid, refined through months of focused training with a former college swim coach who had volunteered to help her prepare. She settled into a rhythm, breathing every third stroke and counting laps to maintain her pace. The pool was 25 yards per length, meaning she needed to complete 20 lengths total. By the 10th length, Sarah could feel the familiar burn beginning in her shoulders and lats. Swimming was indeed different from running, recruiting muscles that didn't get the same workout during her usual training. But her cardiovascular fitness served her well, keeping her breathing controlled even as her stroke rate remained steady. The SEALs around the pool began to take notice. Her technique wasn't military trained, but it was efficient and sustained. She wasn't thrashing or fighting the water like many beginners, instead moving through it with the steady determination of someone who had learned to push through discomfort. Commander Walsh found himself impressed despite his initial skepticism. He had watched hundreds of candidates attempt this swim, and many military personnel struggled to maintain the pace Sarah was demonstrating. Her stroke looked tired but determined as she approached the halfway point. The 15th length marked a crucial moment. This was where many people began to fade, where the accumulated fatigue of swimming started to break down technique and slow overall times. Sarah felt the challenge but drew on her marathon experience, knowing how to pace herself through extended physical effort. Her stroke count remained remarkably consistent, a sign of good conditioning and mental discipline. She wasn't allowing panic or fatigue to disrupt her rhythm, instead treating the swim like a long run where steady effort trumped explosive speed. By the 18th length, Sarah could hear voices around the pool, though she couldn't make out the words through her focused concentration. She was entering the final push, the point where mental toughness mattered as much as physical conditioning. The 19th length felt endless, her shoulders burning with accumulated lactic acid. But Sarah had been here before. In the final miles of marathons, when every step felt like a battle, she knew how to find that extra gear when her body wanted to quit. As she touched the wall for the final time and surfaced, Sarah immediately looked toward Dr. Peterson and his stopwatch. The research coordinator was staring at his timing device with a puzzled expression, then looking back at Sarah as if confirming what he had just witnessed. "Time," Dr. Peterson called out, his voice carrying a note of surprise that he quickly tried to mask with professional neutrality. The pool area buzzed with quiet conversation among the SEALs, their voices mixing curiosity with disbelief. Commander Walsh approached the pool edge as Sarah pulled herself out of the water, her breathing heavy but controlled. "Nice swim," he said, his tone carrying new respect. "Dr. Peterson, what was her time?" The research coordinator checked his stopwatch again before answering. 12 minutes, 34 seconds. The number hung in the air like a challenge, significantly faster than the maximum allowable time and well within the range that would pass military standards. One of the younger SEALs whistled low under his breath. "That's faster than Johnson's time last month," he commented to his teammate, referring to a recent candidate who had struggled with the swimming portion of his assessment. Sarah toweled off, trying to read the faces around her. She could sense that her time had surprised them, though she wasn't sure if 12 minutes 34 seconds was good, bad, or merely adequate by their standards. The looks she was receiving suggested it might be better than they had expected. "How do you feel?" Dr. Peterson asked as he recorded her time on his clipboard. Sarah considered the question honestly. "Tired, but good." The pool felt fast. It was runner's terminology, the way athletes described tracks or courses that seemed to encourage good performances. Commander Walsh's expression had shifted subtly. Where before he had shown polite encouragement mixed with realistic expectations, now there was genuine curiosity. This civilian athlete had just posted a swimming time that would have been respectable for many of his own men. The first test was complete, but 4 more events remained. Sarah had surprised them with her swimming, but everyone knew that the upcoming challenges would test different aspects of fitness entirely. The pool had been about endurance and technique, but the remaining events would demand raw strength, power, and the ability to maintain performance across multiple disciplines. As they moved toward the area set up for push-ups and sit-ups, Sarah caught fragments of conversation among the SEALs. Their initial dismissive attitude was evolving into something closer to professional interest. She had earned their attention with that swim, though she knew that respect would have to be earned with each subsequent event. The gymnasium area buzzed with quiet efficiency, as equipment was arranged for the strength testing portion. 2 exercise mats lay precisely positioned on the polished floor, surrounded by timing equipment and the same careful attention to detail that marked every aspect of military training. Sarah studied the setup while toweling the last drops of chlorine water from her hair. Push-ups and sit-ups seemed deceptively simple compared to the swimming challenge she had just completed, but she knew that military standards would test her upper body and core strength in ways her running training had never demanded. Dr. Peterson consulted his protocol sheets, explaining the testing procedures with clinical precision. 2 minutes maximum for push-ups, proper form required throughout. 2-minute rest, then 2 minutes maximum for sit-ups. Same standards applied to all military candidates. Commander Walsh positioned himself where he could observe Sarah's form directly. In military testing, proper technique was non-negotiable. Partial repetitions didn't count, and maintaining standards under fatigue was often where civilian athletes discovered the gap between general fitness and military-specific conditioning. "I should mention," Walsh said conversationally, "we're pretty strict about form. Arms need to break 90 degrees on the down, full extension on the up, no sagging hips, no partial reps." His tone was helpful rather than intimidating, the guidance of someone who had seen many people fail these tests through technique breakdown rather than pure strength limitations. Sarah nodded, dropping to the mat to test her positioning. The gymnasium felt different from her home gym, more serious somehow. The walls displayed motivational phrases and unit emblems that spoke to decades of men pushing themselves beyond normal human limitations in this very space. The SEALs gathered in a loose semicircle, their interest now clearly engaged after her swimming performance. They watched with the critical eyes of professionals evaluating a colleague, looking for signs of strength, endurance, and the mental toughness that separated elite athletes from recreational exercisers. "Ready when you are," Dr. Peterson announced, his stopwatch held at the ready. Sarah assumed the starting position, her hands placed shoulder-width apart, body forming a straight line from head to heels. The position felt solid, though she knew that 2 minutes could feel like an eternity under these circumstances. "Begin." Sarah started with a controlled rhythm, focusing on perfect form rather than explosive speed. Her marathon training had taught her the value of sustainable pace, and she applied that wisdom here. Each push-up was deliberate, controlled, meeting the depth requirements without wasting energy on excessive range of motion. The first 30 seconds felt manageable, her breathing steady as she maintained consistent form. The watching SEALs remained quiet, their expressions professional as they evaluated her technique. So far, every repetition would count, no corrections needed. By the 1-minute mark, Sarah could feel the accumulating fatigue in her shoulders and triceps. These were muscles that supported her during long runs, but were rarely asked to work as primary movers for extended periods. She adjusted her breathing pattern, exhaling on the push phase to maintain rhythm. "Form looks good," Commander Walsh commented quietly to Dr. Peterson, though his voice was loud enough for Sarah to hear. The encouragement helped, confirming that her technique was holding up under fatigue. The 90-second mark brought new challenges. Sarah's arms were beginning to shake slightly, and she had to concentrate harder to maintain the strict depth requirements. This was where mental toughness mattered as much as physical strength, pushing through discomfort to maintain performance standards. Several of the observing SEALs exchanged glances. They recognized the signs of someone working at their absolute limit while maintaining technical standards, a combination that spoke to both physical preparation and mental discipline. 30 seconds remaining, Dr. Peterson announced. Sarah gritted her teeth, finding reserves of strength she wasn't sure existed moments before. Her pace had slowed, but her form remained solid, each repetition meeting the depth and extension requirements. The final 15 seconds felt endless. Sarah's entire upper body was burning, her breathing heavy but still controlled. She could hear her heart pounding in her ears, but she continued grinding out repetitions with stubborn determination. "Time!" Dr. Peterson called, and Sarah immediately collapsed to the mat, her arms trembling from the sustained effort. She had maintained the pace longer than she expected, though she had no idea if her total would be impressive by military standards. Commander Walsh approached with his count. 87, he announced, his tone carrying a note of surprise. "All counted, good form throughout." The number seemed to resonate among the watching SEALs, several of whom nodded approvingly. Dr. Peterson recorded the number, then began setting up for the sit-ups portion. Sarah used the 2-minute rest period to recover, focusing on controlled breathing and trying to relax her burning shoulder muscles. 87 push-ups sounded impressive to her, but she couldn't read the expressions of the men around her well enough to know if it met their expectations. "That's a solid number," one of the younger SEALs commented to his teammate. "Better than Rodriguez managed last week." The casual comparison suggested that Sarah's performance was legitimately competitive with active military personnel, not just adequate for a civilian athlete. The sit-up setup looked straightforward, but Sarah knew that 2 minutes of maximum effort would test her core strength in ways that her running training had never demanded. She positioned herself on the mat, feet anchored, hands behind her head, preparing for another bout of sustained effort. Commander Walsh knelt beside the mat to observe her form, his role as official counter adding weight to the moment. "Same deal," he explained. "Full range of motion. Shoulder blades touch the deck. Sit up until your elbows touch your knees. 2 minutes maximum." Sarah focused on her breathing, trying to stay relaxed despite the growing attention from the assembled SEALs. Her push-up performance had clearly elevated their interest level, and she could sense the anticipation building for this next test. "Ready?" Dr. Peterson asked, his stopwatch reset and ready. Sarah nodded, settling into the starting position and preparing to discover just how much her core could endure under military testing standards. The gymnasium fell silent, except for the quiet sounds of military personnel conducting their own training in adjacent areas. This moment felt like a threshold. Another opportunity to prove that civilian fitness could compete with military conditioning, if the athlete was determined enough to push through the inevitable wall of fatigue and discomfort. "Begin!" Dr. Peterson's voice cut through the gymnasium silence, and Sarah immediately fell into a steady rhythm of sit-ups. Her core muscles engaged with each repetition, shoulder blades touching the mat before rising, until her elbows met her knees in perfect form. The first minute passed smoothly, Sarah maintaining a pace that felt sustainable while ensuring each movement met Commander Walsh's exacting standards. Her breathing remained controlled, and she found herself drawing on the same mental strategies that had carried her through difficult marathon training sessions. "Looking strong," Walsh commented quietly, his count steady as he tracked each repetition. The watching SEALs continued their professional observation, noting how Sarah's form remained consistent even as the repetitions accumulated and fatigue began to build. By the 90-second mark, Sarah could feel the familiar burn spreading through her abdominal muscles. Her pace had slowed slightly, but her technique remained solid. She focused on breathing patterns, exhaling during the upward motion to maintain rhythm and avoid the muscle tension that could lead to early fatigue. The final 30 seconds tested every aspect of her mental toughness. Her core was screaming for relief, but Sarah pushed through with the same determination that had carried her through marathon wall moments. Each sit-up became an individual battle, fought and won through sheer stubborn refusal to quit. "Time," Peterson called, and Sarah remained on the mat for a moment, catching her breath while her abdominal muscles continued to burn. She had maintained effort until the very end, though she had no idea how her total compared to military expectations. Commander Walsh announced her count with unmistakable respect in his voice. 93 sit-ups, all counted. The number seemed to create a stir among the observing SEALs, several of whom exchanged meaningful glances. Dr. Peterson recorded the results, then consulted his testing protocol. "Next event is pull-ups," end quote, he announced. "No time limit. Just maximum repetitions until failure. Same military standards for form and range of motion." The pull-up bar was mounted at a height that required a small step for Sarah to reach, its metal surface polished smooth by thousands of hands that had gripped it during testing. This event worried her more than the others, as upper body pulling strength was furthest from her marathon-focused training background. Several SEALs had gathered closer now, their interest clearly piqued by her performance in the first 3 events. Sarah could overhear fragments of their conversations, references to scores and comparisons that suggested her numbers were surprisingly competitive. Commander Walsh positioned himself to spot her if needed, though his role was primarily to count repetitions and ensure proper form. "Dead hang to start," he explained. "Pull until your chin clears the bar, lower to full extension. No kipping. No momentum. Just straight pulling strength." Sarah approached the bar with more nervousness than she had felt for the previous events. Pull-ups required raw upper body power, the kind of strength that came from specific training rather than general cardiovascular fitness. She had worked on this movement during her preparation, but knew it remained her weakest area. The bar felt solid in her hands as she established her grip, shoulder-width apart with palms facing away. She hung for a moment, finding her balance, and preparing mentally for what she knew would be a shorter test than the previous timed events. Her first pull-up came smoothly, chin clearing the bar with room to spare before lowering to full extension. The movement felt controlled, though she could already sense the specific muscle demands that would limit her total repetitions. "Good," Walsh counted. 1. His voice was encouragingly matter-of-fact, treating her effort with the same professional attention he would give any candidate. The second and third repetitions felt similar to the first, though Sarah could detect the early signs of fatigue beginning to accumulate in her lats and biceps. She focused on smooth, controlled movement, rather than trying to rush through repetitions that might break down technically. By the fifth pull-up, the effort was becoming noticeably harder. Sarah's muscles were feeling the sustained load, and she had to concentrate more intensely to maintain the full range of motion that military standards demanded. The watching SEALs observed with professional interest. Pull-ups were a fundamental measure of functional strength in their world, and they could recognize the signs of someone working at their absolute limit while maintaining technical standards. Sarah's seventh repetition required significant effort, her muscles trembling slightly as she pulled her chin above the bar. She knew she was approaching her limit, but refused to attempt a partial repetition that wouldn't count toward her total. The eighth pull-up was pure determination. Sarah's entire upper body was burning, but she managed to complete the full movement before lowering to a dead hang. She attempted a ninth repetition, pulling with everything she had, but couldn't quite get her chin above the bar level. 8, Commander Walsh announced with evident approval. All counted. Excellent form throughout. He stepped forward to help her down from the bar, noting the trembling in her arms that indicated she had pushed to complete muscle failure. Dr. Peterson recorded the number while the assembled SEALs discussed her performance in quiet tones. Sarah caught enough fragments to understand that 8 pull-ups was considered a respectable showing, particularly for someone without military training background. "How do you feel about the run?" Walsh asked as they prepared to move to the final event. The question carried weight, as the 4-mile run would test whether Sarah could maintain performance after the accumulated fatigue from swimming, push-ups, sit-ups, and pull-ups. Sarah considered honestly before answering, "Tired. But the run is my strongest event. I think I've got something left." Her confidence was genuine, built on years of competitive marathon experience and the knowledge that endurance running was where her training had been most focused. The group moved toward the facility's outdoor track, where the final test would determine whether Sarah's overall performance would be truly impressive or simply adequate. The run would be 4 miles of sustained effort, conducted on the same course used for official SEAL candidate testing. Commander Walsh fell into step beside her as they walked to the starting line. "You've surprised us so far," he admitted. "Your swimming was solid, and those strength numbers are competitive with our regular candidates. But the run after all this fatigue? That's where we'll see what you're really made of." The challenge felt familiar yet different as Sarah prepared for her strongest event. She had run longer distances countless times, but never after depleting her upper body strength so completely. This would test a different kind of endurance, the ability to perform when her body was already compromised by previous efforts. The track stretched out before them, marked at quarter-mile intervals, and surrounded by the same attention to precision that characterized every aspect of the facility. Sarah could see the finish line in the distance, 4 miles away and representing the final measure of whether she could truly compete with military athletic standards. The afternoon sun beat down on the track as Sarah towed the starting line, her legs feeling surprisingly fresh despite the accumulated fatigue from the previous events. The familiar pre-race butterflies had returned, but this time they carried excitement rather than pure nervousness. Running was her domain, the place where years of training and natural ability converged. Dr. Peterson explained the course one final time. 4 miles, 16 laps around this quarter-mile track. We'll call out your splits at each mile marker, and timing stops when you cross the finish line. His clinical tone couldn't hide his own curiosity about how this final event would unfold. Commander Walsh positioned himself near the start-finish line, where he could observe Sarah's pacing and form throughout the run. Several other SEALs had gathered as well, their interest now fully engaged after her surprising performance in the strength events. The standard passing time is 28 minutes, 30 seconds, Walsh mentioned casually as Sarah completed her final stretching routine. Most of our candidates aim for well under that. But it's the minimum acceptable performance. Sarah nodded, calculating the pace requirements in her head. 7 minutes and 8 seconds per mile was comfortably within her capabilities under normal circumstances, but she had never attempted a 4-mile time trial after swimming 500 yards and completing maximum repetition strength tests. The track felt perfect beneath her feet, the rubberized surface providing just the right combination of firmness and cushioning. Sarah had run on hundreds of different surfaces during her marathon career, and she could immediately tell this track was designed for fast times. "Whenever you're ready," Dr. Peterson called, his stopwatch prepared for the final test. Sarah took several deep breaths, finding her mental focus and preparing to discover whether her endurance strength could overcome the accumulated fatigue from the earlier events. She started conservatively, settling into a rhythm that felt sustainable rather than aggressive. Her first lap came in at 1 minute 40 seconds, slightly faster than the required pace but well within her comfort zone. The watching seals noted her smooth stride and relaxed breathing pattern. By the fourth lap, Sarah had completed her first mile in 6 minutes 50 seconds, comfortably ahead of the required pace. Dr. Peterson called out the split time, and she could hear approval in his voice. Her form remained relaxed, her breathing controlled, showing no signs of the fatigue that had been evident after the pull-ups. Commander Walsh observed with growing interest. He had watched thousands of candidates attempt this run, and he could recognize the signs of someone who was genuinely comfortable at this pace. Sarah wasn't fighting the distance or struggling to maintain speed. She was simply running within her capabilities. The second mile brought its own challenges, as the accumulated fatigue from swimming and strength training began to interact with the sustained running effort. Sarah's shoulders felt heavy from the earlier exertions, but her legs remained strong, and her cardiovascular system was responding exactly as it did during her marathon training sessions. Her second mile split came in at 6 minutes 45 seconds, actually faster than the first mile, as she settled into her natural rhythm. The total time of 13 minutes 35 seconds for 2 miles put her significantly ahead of the required pace, with plenty of cushion for any fade that might develop. The seals around the track began to take serious notice. Several candidates struggled to maintain the minimum pace requirements for the full distance, but Sarah was running like someone who could sustain this effort for much longer than 4 miles. "Looking smooth out there," one of the younger SEALs commented to his teammate. "She's got that long-distance runner economy. Barely looks like she's working." The observation was accurate. Sarah's years of marathon training had developed the efficient movement patterns that made sustained effort look deceptively easy. The third mile tested Sarah's ability to maintain pace as true fatigue began to accumulate. Her breathing deepened slightly, and she could feel the specific tiredness that came from running after strength training. But her pace remained steady, her form unchanged, drawing on the mental toughness that had carried her through countless difficult training sessions. Her third mile split was 6 minutes 52 seconds. A slight fade, but still well within the required standards. Dr. Peterson's voice carried genuine surprise as he called out the time, recognizing that she was maintaining a pace that would result in an impressive overall performance. Commander Walsh found himself recalculating the trajectory of Sarah's run. If she could maintain anything close to her current pace for the final mile, her total time would be genuinely competitive with the scores posted by his own men during their regular fitness assessments. The final mile would determine whether Sarah could finish strong or would experience the kind of dramatic fade that often occurred when fatigue from multiple events combined with the sustained effort of distance running. Sarah could feel her body reaching deeper energy reserves, but her marathon experience had taught her how to manage this transition. She began the 13th lap knowing that her body was fully committed now, every system working at capacity to maintain the pace she had established. Her form remained smooth, though the effort was clearly deeper than it had been during the first half of the run. The 14th lap brought new sensations, the specific fatigue that runners recognized as the point where mental toughness became as important as physical conditioning. Sarah's breathing was labored but controlled, her stride frequency unchanged even as the effort required for each step increased. The 15th lap was all determination. Sarah could hear the encouragement from the watching SEALs, though their voices seemed to come from a distance as she focused entirely on maintaining her rhythm. Her legs felt heavy, but they continued to turn over with the mechanical consistency that separated trained athletes from recreational runners. As she began the final lap, Sarah could see the finish line ahead and feel the accumulated gaze of every person around the track. This was the moment that would define her overall performance. The final 400 yards that would determine whether she had merely survived the military fitness standards or had genuinely excelled against them. Her arms pumped with renewed determination as she entered the final turn, drawing on every lesson learned during years of competitive running. The finish line grew larger with each stride, representing not just the end of a difficult test, but validation that civilian fitness could indeed compete with military standards when backed by sufficient training and mental toughness. Sarah's final sprint down the homestretch surprised everyone, including herself. Despite 4 miles of accumulated fatigue on top of the previous events, she found a gear that her marathon training had developed but never fully tested. Her stride lengthened, her arms drove harder, and she crossed the finish line with the kind of kick that demonstrated deep reserves of strength and determination. Dr. Peterson's voice carried unmistakable amazement as he called out her final time. 27 minutes. 14 seconds. The number hung in the air like a challenge to everything the watching SEALs had assumed about civilian athletic capability. Commander Walsh approached with his hand extended, his expression transformed from polite encouragement to genuine respect. "Outstanding performance," he said, gripping her hand firmly. "That time would rank in the top 20% of our active duty personnel." The assembled SEALs broke into spontaneous applause, their initial skepticism completely replaced by professional admiration. Sarah had not merely met military fitness standards. She had exceeded them decisively, posting scores that would be impressive for anyone regardless of their background. Dr. Peterson consulted his clipboard, running through her complete results with obvious satisfaction. Swimming, 12 minutes 34 seconds. Push-ups, 87 repetitions. Sit-ups, 93 repetitions. Pull-ups, 8 repetitions. 4-mile run, 27 minutes 14 seconds. Each number represented performance that exceeded minimum military standards. The research coordinator continued with evident excitement in his usually clinical voice. "Your overall score places you in the 92nd percentile of all military candidates who have taken this test in the past year. That includes active duty SEALs, Marine Recon, and other special operations personnel." Commander Walsh shook his head in amazement. "I've been administering these tests for 15 years, and I can count on one hand the number of people who have posted scores in that range on their first attempt. Most of our own guys need multiple attempts to reach those numbers." One of the younger SEALs approached with genuine curiosity. "Ma'am, what's your training background? Those aren't normal civilian numbers." His question reflected the group's collective bewilderment at witnessing a performance that challenged their assumptions about military versus civilian fitness levels. Sarah explained her marathon training regimen, her focus on consistent high-mileage weeks, and the specific preparation she had undertaken after receiving the invitation. But even as she spoke, she could see that the SEALs were processing something larger than just her individual performance. "You know what this means?" Commander Walsh asked Dr. Peterson. "We might need to reconsider some of our recruitment assumptions. If civilian athletes can achieve these performance levels, we're potentially missing talent that could excel in military special operations." The research coordinator nodded enthusiastically, already envisioning the implications for his study. "Her results will definitely influence our recommendations about expanding the candidate pool for special operations selection programs. This kind of performance suggests that the gap between elite civilian and military fitness may be smaller than we've traditionally assumed." As they walked back toward the facility building, Sarah found herself surrounded by SEALs, asking detailed questions about her training methods, nutrition strategies, and mental preparation techniques. The conversation had shifted completely from polite skepticism to professional consultation among equals. Commander Walsh pulled her aside as they reached the building entrance. "I want to make you an offer," he said seriously. "We have openings in our civilian fitness consultant program, working with candidates who are preparing for special operations selection. Your performance today, combined with your obvious knowledge of endurance training, makes you exactly the kind of person who could help our prospective candidates achieve their potential." The offer was unexpected but intriguing. Sarah had come to the facility that morning simply curious about how her fitness would compare to military standards. She was leaving with validation that exceeded her most optimistic expectations, and an opportunity to contribute to training programs that produced some of the world's most elite warriors. Dr. Peterson approached with a thick folder of papers. "We'll need to conduct follow-up interviews and assessments as part of the research protocol," he explained. "Your performance has created some interesting data points that warrant deeper investigation. Would you be willing to participate in additional testing sessions?" Sarah looked around at the faces of men who had begun the day skeptically watching a civilian attempt their standards, and ended it by offering her professional opportunities within their community. The transformation felt surreal, but the respect in their expressions was unmistakably genuine. "Mind if I take a turn?" had been her casual question that morning when she noticed the skeptical expressions and overheard the whispered comments about her chances. Now, as afternoon shadows lengthened across the facility, that question seemed prophetic. She had indeed taken her turn, and in doing so had demonstrated that exceptional athletic performance transcended the traditional boundaries between civilian and military fitness. Her achievement would influence recruitment policies, training programs, and assumptions about human potential within the special operations community. The drive home that evening felt different from the nervous journey that morning. Sarah's invitation letter sat on the passenger seat, now accompanied by business cards from Commander Walsh and Dr. Peterson, along with a formal offer to join the civilian consultant program that would allow her to help train future SEAL candidates. The day had proven that when dedication meets opportunity, even the most elite standards can be not just met, but exceeded. Sarah had obliterated more than just fitness benchmarks. She had shattered assumptions about what was possible when an ordinary person refused to accept limitations and instead asked a simple question: "Mind if I take a turn?" The laughter had indeed stopped, replaced by respect, opportunity, and a recognition that excellence knows no boundaries when backed by sufficient determination and preparation.